Good morning.
Good morning. How is everybody doing this week? I hope you guys are having a great week. Babe here is back today to give you guys some tips and tricks. And this week we're talking about breastfeeding myths. So we want to share with you guys some of the common myths that we come across, I think, most often.
There are many.
Yes. And so I think there's just a lot of, experiences that people have, and they kind of build from that, like, oh, well, this must be the experience for everybody, and it might not be. So the first one we wanted to talk about was sore nipples. So tell us about that, Heather.
So breastfeeding should hurt. Breastfeeding should be painful in the beginning. You need to endure it.
You're going to build calluses.
You're going to build calluses.
Yeah.
That bleeding is normal. This is all something that we hear often, very drastically from one end of the spectrum to the other. And really the reality of it is that breastfeeding should not hurt. There's nothing about it that should hurt. There are exceptions to that with regards to nipple sensitivity and hormonal influence, but outside of that, which not every mom experiences, it really shouldn't hurt. It should be super duper comfortable, super enjoyable bonding experience with your baby. And definitely shouldn't hurt and ever cause nipple trauma.
Yeah, that's my thing. It's like some people might have more sensitivity to others, especially if you have just naturally very sensitive nipples. Okay, this is going to be a big sensation.
Yes.
And so that can be like, whoa, okay, that's like a lot happening. Yeah. But it shouldn't break down the tissue at all.
Ever.
So that's really something to remember. And if you are a mom out there right now and somebody told you like, hey, it's gonna hurt, but you have scabs or cracks or bleeding,
that is not okay.
that is not normal, and oftentimes you might just need some latching positioning assistance, or it might be further, like something's actually going on with the baby's mouth or something like that needs to be further investigated. So we want to break that myth that the nipple damage is not normal. And we want to make sure that mom's comfortable, have a good experience. It's one of the top reasons people quit breastfeeding.
Or don't start at all.
Is fear of pain or actual pain. And nipple pain is really intense.
It's real.
So we want to make sure that we break that myth down, that we're not expecting any nipple damage.
Seek help. You have any pain, I don't care if it's even just sensitivity, seek help. Because it may be hormonal influence, sure, but it may also be something that we can help you with.
Yeah, absolutely. So the second myth we wanted to break down today was about volumes of feeding, and I think this can get really tricky when you start offering bottles because you're actually seeing some volume. But even before that, like if you go somewhere and you get a weighted feeding, one of the things that they discovered through some of the studies that they did on like how much babies eat in a 24-hour period is that each feeding varied a lot. And so this can really trip up families, because if we think about a bottle feeding, you put the same amount in every bottle and that's how the baby eats. But when we're talking about breastfeeding, if the baby came back to the breast in 2 hours versus 3 hours, their volume on that feeding might be smaller. And then if they go, a full 3 hours, they might have a bigger feeding. If they're in a cluster feeding, kind of towards the evening, they might have a bunch of feedings really close together. Those might be really small. And so what can be really confusing is if you give a bottle, and typically babies, I think, take a little bit more by bottle than by breast, has been my experience, especially if we're not pacing the feeding. But if they take, a 4-ounce bottle, then mom's like, oh my gosh, I got to come up with 4 ounces every single feeding, and my body can't do that. And they go into panic, like, I'll never be able to get the baby enough. But it might just be at that one feeding, they had a larger volume, and then at the next feeding, they might end up taking a smaller volume. And even with bottle feeding, you might not always see them take the exact same bottle feeding amount. Again, if they come back, if you're pumping for your baby when you're back to work, it might not always be exactly 4 ounces or 3 ounces, whatever it is.
And remember that most moms do have a higher milk volume in the morning, and that is typically when babies take a higher volume. and then
I know.
decrease it throughout the day.
Yeah, and I know when we're talking with moms or we're doing a visit, we do weighted feedings.
And for those of you guys who aren't familiar with what a weighted feed is where we actually can weigh the baby before a breastfeeding session, weigh them after a breastfeeding session, and calculate how much they transfer from the breast or drink from the breast. So it's a wonderful tool to use for various situations.
It requires a very special,
very special, sensitive scale.
Yes. Scale. That also is very expensive to repair. Heather and I have found out. But what we have found with that study is that, and then what we do when we're in a visit, like I'll take into consideration, like what time of the day is it? And I'll be sure to ask, like, how long has it been since the baby's last feeding?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's going to really skew what I'm expecting the baby to take and if it's a problem or not. So that's something to consider too. And just to give you guys some peace of mind, if you don't see your baby taking the exact same volume, we want to listen to babies' cues. They're so smart, and feed them if they're cueing, whether they ate 1 hour ago or 2 hours ago. And then we always want to keep that parental guidance. Like, we're not going to let them go too long, but keeping that parental guidance there and feeding them per their cues, they'll usually take an average amount in 24 hours. So I always think of it like, we always talk about like a tank, and they fill up this tank in 24 hours. Yeah. And how they fill that up might be different all throughout the day, but they're going to make sure they get their 24 hours.
They know what they need. So if they don't have it at one side of the morning into a night, they're going to make up for it.
Yeah.
They're going to go, oh, shoot. I better make up.
Yeah, and feed more frequently. So we're going to talk about that. And then the last one we want to talk about, I think this is always so fascinating. Is the volume per 24 hours and how that doesn't really change too much between 1 month and 6 months. You want to talk about your experience with that, or just kind of what you know about that?
After the point of about 1 month of age, a baby's intake needs kind of plateau. It kind of stops and stays about the same for the next several months, about 5 months, until solids are introduced. And at that point, it's really fascinating because we see with the formula side of the world that volume changes continue to increase with babies' age and or weight. With breast milk, it's a little different, a lot different. Yeah. And the composition, it's the makeup of the breast milk that actually continues to change to meet baby's needs, as opposed to the volume, which I always thought was one of the most fascinating things. Yeah.
And I really feel like maybe this is the tie-in. There is a lower risk to obesity,
and
metabolic issues when you're breastfeeding, and I wonder if this, with the formula, a need to always increase volume makes you take in a higher concentration of some things, that might, and then a higher volume. So you're taking so much in, and then with the breast milk, you're leveling off, and the composition is changing. It's just really, really fascinating to me. But it's hard for a lot of people to get their brain around, because they're like, wait a second, you're meaning like at 1 month my baby takes 3 ounces per feeding, and at 4 months they're going to take 3 ounces per feeding, and this is the little caveat. No, maybe not. But their 24-hour volume will be very similar. So they might not jump from 25 ounces to 40 ounces between 1 month and 4 months, but they might change their volume per feeding because they're going longer, and their little belly can hold more per feeding. So we see them taking maybe 3 ounces at that 1 month mark. And then they start going, really consistently every 3 hours. They might take 4, 4.5. I don't have a lot of breastfed babies take more than 4, 4.5. Yeah.
Average,
but because they're spacing their feedings out, they take a little bit higher volume. So that's where the change might be. But their 24-hour intake is staying relatively the same. There might be some.
That's the thing to remember, is that 24-hour intake. Try really hard not to focus too much on each individual feed, right? It's more so about that 24-hour intake, filling that food tank, however you do that.
Yeah, and I think this takes a lot of stress off of moms, because I've had moms in a panic, like, okay, I can pump 3 ounces at 1 month, but how in the world am I going to pump 6 ounces in a couple of months? Like, that's what the chart says my baby's supposed to eat, and they're all in this panic, like, I'll never be able to pump that much. And the answer is you might not have to, because a lot of times what we'll see is that these babies don't really increase that much. The increase is very, very small, and we still, of course, want to feed per the baby's cues, but it's a little relief to us to know that we don't have to increase your volume so much like you'd see on some of the formula feeding charts where the babies are up at like 8 ounces by 6 months or something like that. So I hope this information has given you guys some peace of mind and some more tips and tricks on how to make breastfeeding work over the long term, past that early weeks. And we look forward to coming back with you guys soon. I wanted to just give a shout out before we go. We are going to be at the birth fair. So if you don't know what birth fair is basically an awesome coming together of all the wonderful birth, prenatal, postpartum resources in Houston, all come together in one big fair. It's going to be October the 6th. And I'm really bad
Lots
at times.
of booths, lots of speakers.
There's some
really
amazing speakers, lots of booths. It's a wonderful event to bring your family to. Your kids will love it. If you have a baby, definitely come. There's so many amazing resources. If you're pregnant, this is a must attend, okay? If you are pregnant, you have to attend this.
For sure.
Because you will realize what an amazing resource Houston is. It's put together by a wonderful group of ladies out in Houston, and so I really highly recommend. We'll link to the information about that on the comments below so you guys can attend. And if you hear this and you're going to be there, you better come say hi to the babes and let us know that you guys came out because you heard it from us. All right, well, we'll look forward to seeing you guys again in the coming weeks. All right,
Absolutely.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.